Peace, love, and light. This is OMO House. This is Ja. Um, Originally, I wasn't going to make any statements about what's going on in Baltimore, but I did get a number of inboxes and texts pretty much asking me like why I wasn't making a statement, considering what OMO House is about and what we stand for. And to be quite honest with you, I really didn't know what to say. I think after experiencing these events, these acts of violence against black bodies over and over and over and over and over and over, and if I wanted to give the experience of that, I would continue to say over and over, like hundreds of times, because I've been privy to see the list in writing of the men and women who have experienced death at the hands of law enforcement. And then I think that, in conjunction with being honest about the state of affairs in Black America, in terms of the level of incarceration of black bodies, and now that I've been doing work in addiction and substance abuse, realizing the number of people who are victims of a cycle of oppression and internalized hate, it can be a little bit overwhelming. And so when I heard about what happened in Baltimore, it was just pretty much like again. And then even on the day that he was buried, another, unarmed black male killed in Detroit. And so, trying to sit that in a place of spiritual awareness and consciousness and mindfulness has become very difficult. And so, I was actually really quite elated to see a number of my colleagues putting out some really powerful statements about what's going on. And so definitely check those people out. I highly recommend a sister friend, Dr. Stiletto, aka Dr. Stephanie Rose. She just put out a video about some things that we should be mindful about as the media begins to include different voices. So I definitely recommend that you Google her, check out her channel on Vimeo. I think she has some great things to say. I think the only thing that I would add to the conversation that I hope gives it like a particular OMO House spin is one of the things that I hope OMO House represents is this idea that in looking at hospitality, inclusion, reconciliation, and diversity from a body, mind, spirit perspective, that we always question from a spiritual perspective, from our higher consciousness perspective, why are things showing up the way they are, and how are things showing up the way they are. So, for example, when we look at the woman who engaged with her son physically in order to prevent him from becoming involved in throwing of bricks or whatever was happening with the young people at the time. What I noticed this morning as I accidentally had the TV on the news was that this woman was now being interviewed by the media. And one of the things that I would like to share from a spiritual perspective is there is no one who ever communicates, including myself, without an intention and agenda. And media, which is a medium of a communication, also elects to support certain voices or silence other voices because they have an intention and an agenda. And one of the reasons that I suggest you look at Dr. Stiletto's piece is because it helps us articulate why this particular mother is being interviewed. And I have no children, so I don't know if I was in her same position and I was trying to prevent my son from winding up dead in the street. Who knows what my reaction would have been to observing him in certain behavior. I don't know. But I think it's important to say, why is it that the media then chooses to interview her and promote her behavior? Because I know in the same day, there was a young boy. He looks about 7. He's standing in front of a line of police officers looking very militarized, offering them a bottle of water. And in that picture, you see love and compassion and fearlessness, and yet he's not being interviewed. His mother is not being interviewed. And so one of the things that OMO House brings to the forefront in our communication is to be mindful that we live in a culture of violence. And as a former history teacher and as an attorney, I'm very clear about the development of our culture with all that it offers, with all the freedoms that it offers, with all the development that it offers, and all of, the productivity and principles and all that we have to offer. There is also underlying all of that a culture of violence. And so, unlike many people, I'm able to see the beauty of the American experiment. I am able to believe in what's possible, as Dr. Vincent Harding would speak to, is that if we ever did begin to live from those democratic principles, my God, what a country we can be. But at the same time, I'm also honest, and I say that we are a culture of violence. Much that we have achieved has been at the expense of the bodies and cultures of people, not just here, but across the planet. And so I think as we have this conversation about Black Lives Matter, and for those who cannot seem to embrace that because they can only include themselves, I will even throw in, but I will also say that it's an act of selfishness if you can't, as a human being, honor another person's voice to say, I matter, and you have to throw your own voice in there and say, well, I matter too. Just look at that, because this is not about race. It's about the ability to see that you, as an incarnation of the divine, have significance, and your story is your story, and your pain is your pain, and from one human being to another, if I come from love and I believe that we are made in the image and likeness of the divine, there should be something in my spirit that says, yes, I have the courage to listen to your story without including my own. But for those who can't, I'll add in, if all lives matter, and Black Lives Matter, if we're going to embrace that as a truth, we also have to look at what is it in our culture that does not support the idea that we can be and live from love. And so even the things that we are given in terms of news and media and information, much of it supports the intention and the agenda that is not of love, that is not of empowerment, that is not of affinity and community. So I suppose that's what I would like to add to the conversation. As you begin to engage in dialogue, as you watch the news, as you have conversations with one another, ask yourself, what is your commitment in this conversation? If your commitment is to develop community, if your commitment is to be a conscious, mindful being, if your commitment is to live from love, if you believe in the ideals of democracy and are aware that we have yet to achieve that as a principle, but it's still an experiment that's unfolding, then you must be mindful and make the demand that when we tell the stories of all people, that we come from a space of authentic dialogue, that we move past our own selfish intentions and agendas, because sometimes that is part of human nature, but that love requires us to bear witness to the suffering of all people and to say that I am my brother's keeper, that I am my sister's keeper. And if I truly have practiced reconciliation with my own self, my own pain, my own wounds, if I am committed to being inclusive, and I really do honor the idea of diversity, and that I understand that hospitality is a spiritual perspective, then I have to engage in this conversation in a different way. And I guess the best that I can do is close with, the OMO House motto, that HIRD, that hospitality, inclusion, reconciliation, and diversity is, then spun together, that all may hear and be heard. And that heard is HIRD. So I throw this out and ask that we just be mindful and conscious as we continue the dialogue, and that we use our mind as we're watching the medium that sometimes supports because it benefits from our lack of unity, that we be mindful and say, does this make sense? Am I coming from my own prejudices? Am I coming from my own bias? Or am I seated in my spiritual consciousness and I'm willing to listen to other human beings, because soul to soul, we all matter. And if we're honest as a country, finally, we can respect that the reason that this idea of Black Lives Matters has arisen is because, at least what the evidence bears, is that this country has had a very difficult time seeing that Black Lives Matter. And so we almost had to make a statement to make sure you knew, because you act like you don't know. Peace.